Hi folks, Steven here. I'm on the phone with Anne from Pikapi Podcast, and we're here to talk to you about the music of the 14th Pokemon movie, Pokemon the movie Black/White, Victini, and Reshiram/Zekrom. I believe that I have gotten those in the correct order in each time there. So this is the two-movie set that they did that have very similar plot lines, but not quite the same, and some differences between them. And musically, they did some different things on each side of the ocean. In Japan, they have a band called Every Little Thing that did two different songs, one for each movie. And then in the English version, we have two different versions of the same song, Follow Your Star. There's the Ideals mix in the Zekrom movie and the Truth mix in the Reshiram movie. So, a lot of stuff to talk about there because there's a lot of people involved. I think Anne and I both had to do a little extra work on this one, but that's okay.
It was fun. It was worth it.
All right, well, we divide this into three segments. We're going to talk about the production background, then the songs themselves, and then sort of do a compare and contrast and decide which one we like best. But we start each phase on the Japanese side, and Anne, why don't you start by talking a little bit about Every Little Thing, the Japanese group?
Yes. So Every Little Thing is also known as ELT. They debuted in 1996, and they continue to be active today. They are one of the best-selling artists in Japan. If you're a fan of anime or Japanese music, you have probably heard of them. I'm kind of a big fan of them myself. And they are a pop/soft rock duo. They originally debuted as a trio, starting when Kaori Mochida, just off of a somewhat unsuccessful stint in a girl group called Kurobuta All-Stars, she sent in a demo to the Avix Tracks label, wanting to be a solo artist, at the same time that Mitsuru Igarashi was looking for a singer to form a unit with him and his keyboard, and he just happened to know this other guy named Ichiro Ito who was off playing Van Halen cover songs at the US Air Base, and somehow the stars aligned and these three formed a group. Igarashi, the middleman, he left after a couple of albums and left Kaori and Ichiro to go on as a duo. And they seem to have made that work for them despite there being a 10-year age gap between them. According to Ichiro Ito, when he first met Kaori Mochida, she was this little teenager decked out in gyaru fashion, and he was just staring at her like, I don't even know how to relate to you. But again, they seem to have made it work. Before Igarashi left, Every Little Thing had a more synthesized pop rock sound, but after he and his keyboarding skills left, ELT was just a singer and a guitarist, so it forced them to change their sound a bit and evolve. And because the dude left with barely any warning right before a tour, Kaori and Ichiro decide to go ahead with the tour and just keep touring for 2 years as an acoustic act and try to figure out who they were musically now. And that gave rise to the sound they're known for today, more of the soft rock, light pop sound. And this also gave them a bit more creative freedom like that, because, you know, the guy in charge left, so now Kaori starts writing more songs. They start changing the type of music and the type of lyrics they do, and they see a rise in sales and attention, and they started charting higher on the Oricon Billboard, which is a Japanese music industry sales ranking. And they got what every artist hopes for, which is commercial tie-ins, and some of the ones you listeners might recognize are some of classic anime like Initial D and Inuyasha. And as of now, they have reconnected with the former bandmate Igarashi. He often composes and produces for them. And the duo is currently still active. Their last album was released in 2015, Tabi Tabi. And their general sound, that sort of soft rock power pop sound, has remained fairly consistent, but there is some variation from album to album. Notably, it seems like every year, Kaori just keeps singing higher and more cutesy. Like, by the time her career's over, I expect her to be straight up shattering glass. But they always kind of gravitate to a very soft and sweet sound and kind of hang out in that type of feel that suits her voice pretty well. Kaori has a few solo projects. She actually originally intended to debut as a solo artist, so over time she took over a lot more musical control of both the band, writing songs and lyrics, but also producing solo albums. But even through her solo career, she was still just as involved in ELT. Ichiro has also produced a solo album called Diversity in 2009. He's a quieter guy in the public eye, so I found a lot less info on him, whereas Kaori's done like a truckload of commercials and shows and writing songs for other people. But Ito does do composition and arranging work for both the band and for other people, it seems. So, and he can be seen around like variety shows from time to time. So like both of them are still very active in Japanese media.
Okay, well, that explains who the band is for this one. Any idea how they got involved in this project, whether the songs were written for the movie or anything like that?
Well, as usual, all evidence appears to be that the Pokemon Company contacted them or their label and asked them to compose songs for this movie. I imagine, given the nature of the movie and the results that were produced, they were a bit more aware of the movie's themes and production going in, because this is a slightly bigger project than some of the past songs have been. But it looks like they were contracted out of house to produce the ending themes. Sorakoe translates as sky and voice, respectively, and it released as a single in July of 2011. The lyrics were written by Kaori, lead singer of the band. The music was done by a man named Kazuhito Kikuchi, who is a composer and songwriter active in Japan for years and years, writes a lot for the Avix Tracks label that Every Little Thing is on. His big claim to fame is that he's one of the main composers for Hamasaki Ayumi, and he's all over her stuff, so you've probably heard him. The arrangement, as far as I can tell, is always credited as Every Little Thing, so I imagine that means Ito had some input as well into this track. And yeah, that's the background information. They were coupled together and released as an A-side, and technically, Koei is the B-side, although a lot of people think it really should be called a double A-side. But Sora is the one that gets the music video and all the big promo stuff outside of the two movies, so.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about that, whether this would be considered a double A-side, where you have tried to put two hit songs on a single. In the old days, that would have been on like a 45 on both sides of the record. Which I guess means I don't think this ever got a vinyl release, but if they ever did that, that would be a good candidate, I suppose.
Indeed.
Well, that takes care of the Japanese side of production. On the English side, we have a number of people involved, but I think this will line up a bit more directly, if you know what I mean. So, Follow Your Star. Two of the people who wrote it are the usual people you would expect for this era, John Loeffler, and I believe David Wolfert was also involved on that. Now, they did bring in another writer, and that is Alex Nachman, who should be a familiar name because he actually performs the Ideals mix for the Zekrom movie. And not long after this came out, I had a chance to interview Alex, and he goes into some of the details about what the process was. It sounds like they were trying to go for two versions of the same song pretty much straight from the start, rather than trying to create two totally different songs, and that was how things sort of came about that way. Now, John Loeffler and David Wolfert, like I said, they've been working on things since the beginning of the dub switchover, since like season 9. Alex Nachman is one of the new names here. Let me give you a little biographical info. He grew up a little ways north of New York City in, I guess, Sleepy Hollow. Yes, that Sleepy Hollow, if I remember correctly. And moved to Brooklyn and got into a career in music, eventually wound up working with John Loeffler on various things, and that's kind of how he got involved here. If you look at the interview, we talk about his recently released album. I believe it was called This Revolution. Since then, in 2017, he did put out one more album, and that's called Above Sirens, which I guess is sort of a reference to living in New York City where there's always something going on. Having visited there a couple times, I think that's probably what he was going for with that. But we talk a lot about this song in that interview, and some of those details will work their way in here, but I strongly recommend you take a listen to that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mentioned there are two mixes. There's the Ideals mix sung by Alex, and the Truth mix sung by Catherine Rayo. So, Catherine has somewhat of a similar background. I did an interview with her, very lucky on this one to be able to talk to most of the principal players. But she has more of a, I guess, a kid-friendly background because she has worked with stuff for Sesame Street, and apparently back in like the late 90s for the WB station in New York, she was part of a group that they had there that did some like special promos and stuff like that. So technically her stuff, with Pokemon in a way goes back pretty far, but she tends to do a lot of commercial work, and unfortunately I wasn't able to find too much recent. It appears that she had a song used in 2017 in a Lexus commercial, but that was about the most I could find for her. I assume she's still working in children's entertainment in some capacity, but hasn't done too much else with Pokemon. She did do a song for the Eevee short, which would have gone along with the Genesect movie, I believe. And of course, Alex and Catherine would team up to do the Rival Destinies theme, which would be the next season right after this one and the opening theme for the Keldeo movie. So that's a lot of names there. Hopefully you could keep that all straight. But yeah, basically, as far as the actual songs for ending this on the English side, they were going for two different versions of the same song rather than two separate songs, is sort of the short version of all of that.
Nice.
All right. Well, with some of the production stuff at least out of the way, let's talk about the content. Again, we're going to flip over to the Japanese side. I guess we'll have to discuss these songs one by one. Let's start with The Sky. And what's sort of the overall instrumentation of that song?
Well, we can talk about that. I find it very difficult to talk about these two songs separately because they really do form two halves of a whole. But for The Sky, Sora, it kind of starts out like soft but upbeat, and it starts off with her voice and some, just classic, three-piece band type instrumentation. There's a guitar, there's a vocalist, there's some drums, a little bit of keyboard, and it has build and stuff and emotional movement, but it kind of stays the same throughout, which is a very distinct contrast to Koe, which starts off a bit quieter and somber and like synthetic water droplets and all sorts of things, and then builds to this roaring electric guitar and all sorts of fun craziness. That's kind of the instrumentation, and it is an interesting juxtaposition to the lyrics and the plot of the two songs, because Sora, while it seems to be the more upbeat and cheery when the song first starts, it's lyrically much more depressing and quieter and like a struggle to find the hope, whereas Koe starts off and it sounds like it's going to be this quiet, introspective piece, and it turns out to be the one that's just brimming with energy and joy and hope and, have a strong heart. So I find that juxtaposition of music to lyrics very interesting, and the fact that both musically and lyrically these songs echo each other and answer each other. So it's very difficult to talk about them separately, but...
Interesting. So would you say then that these were not created, I don't know if in a vacuum is the right phrase to use there, but in other words, they were created in tandem or with respect to one another, it sounds like?
With respect to one another and with respect to the movie and the creative goal that they were going for with having two different ending themes and two different soundtracks for each movie. And let's see, because Sora, The Sky, much as it sounds upbeat and cheery at the start, it's the one that's talking about like I'm lonely and it's so hard to believe in hope and the sky's growing dimmer and dimmer and all the lights are going out. And then Koe, which starts off a bit softer, is the one that talks about like happiness and strong heart and like spreading happiness. And there are points where the lyrics are exactly the same, just at different parts of the song, and points where one like alludes to the other. The ending of Koe seems to answer where Sora ends, and where Sora ends, Koe seems to begin right there. They almost form a loop. It's so fascinating.
So, do you think there was an intention, at least on some level, for these songs to be played back to back in any way?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I almost don't know if it matters which one you start with or not. Possibly Sora, because it's the A side, and Koe definitely seems to have more of an answering than a prompting. But yeah, like I definitely feel like if you listened to this single, you're getting a complete story. You're getting a beginning and a middle and an end.
So between the two songs, I guess, is how we're going to have to take a look at this. What parts, like lyrically, sort of match up with things in the movie, do you feel?
Okay, so looking at Koe first, the voice, there's a lot of talk about like, youth is vibrant and, the past was full of joy, but as time goes on, you start feeling lonely and you start crying and you start feeling regret and missing people, like so many things that seem to talk about Victini and that how having a strong heart and it being fortunate that you passed by here, wanting to live on and to be able to tell him something, like, it's Victini's relationship to the king, being able to meet Ash. Like, there's so many lines about that. And then I'm going to switch over to the sky, Sora, here really quick. And there's a lot more of the sense of the passage of time and that scene of, like, in the evening sky, the moon dimming and it swallows the world, and a loss can bring forth something new and confirming your tomorrow and like just continuing and continuing and continuing to live on. But at the same time, days that will not last forever. And then again, more loss. Having dreams of like definitely someday, but the days seem aimless. Like there's a whole lot that you can relate to the story and the journey that Victini goes through. You could possibly relate it to the people of that kingdom that Damon and everybody lives in, having lost all the vibrancy after the war between the hero of truth and hero of ideals. So yeah, there's a lot that could relate to this movie.
I see. Yeah, having you explain the lyrics, I did look up a translation before we started this. I think that adds probably a fair bit of value to these. I don't want to say they're badly composed or anything. They're decently well, but they're not, I wouldn't say, so amazingly well written and composed that if you didn't know the lyrics, you would be really impressed by them. Not to say that the lyrics are maybe the most awesome thing ever either, but I'm just saying that I think knowing the lyrics gives more value, I guess, to it. Is that about right?
I would definitely say every little thing has a style, and they have a wheelhouse, and I don't know how to phrase this in a way that doesn't sound like I'm bagging on them, because I'm not. I really do like their music. But they definitely have a style of composing their songs that is less of a variation, I guess. So they will always have that happy key. And, her voice is always going to be very soft and very soothing and very pleasant. Even if she's singing about something very sad, she's not going to suddenly turn into this sultry, seducing singer or this, very slow and somber singer. She's always going to have that slightly cutesy, positive type voice. And that's just their, musical voice. So I definitely think being able to understand the lyrics when it comes to the songs of this group is an asset into understanding what they're singing about, because there's not going to be a huge range of instrumentation, because they did, spend so long touring as an acoustic act, just the two of them. So even though they have other musicians on their CD or backing them up when they perform sometimes, it's the guitar and the girl, and that's it. That's what they focus on. So yeah, I definitely think you have a point when you bring that up, is that when you can't understand the lyrics, there's not a lot musically that's gonna really drive home the point of the song and the contrast between the two songs in a way that, say, the compositional style that we see in the two English songs.
Yeah, I guess we'll be moving on to that shortly. I guess the other thing I did kind of want to mention is that I think it's The Sky has sort of a false ending, at least if you listen to the CD version. One thing I found kind of interesting, these two songs, they are not the same length. There's probably about 20 or 30 seconds difference. However, about 4.5 minutes into The Sky, it kind of goes silent for a moment, and then there's some instrumentation that comes back in. And the voice happens to be about 4.5 minutes long. So that was just something I noticed structurally, because obviously the credit sequence is going to be more or less the same between the two versions.
Right.
And I figure, how are you going to square that without having to make sure the two songs in the English side, they're by design going to be similar duration, but in the Japanese version, if they are in fact writing two different songs, there's a little harder to work that one out.
That makes sense. Yeah. Being that Sora is kind of similar in style throughout, it's the one that if it's a shorter song, it's most easily to add on a bit of an extended outro to make it fit the entire credits sequence, whereas Koei starts in one place and ends in a very different place, so it would be much more difficult, I think.
Keep listening for more from this interview.